I do think games like Crimson Desert will age exceptionally well. As players and critics move beyond expectations shaped by more conventional open-world titles, Crimson Desert's uniqueness will become more apparent and more appreciated. Its flaws become part of the texture of the game rather than a bit of friction.
Kin, golden, tsugi, joinery. In Zen aesthetics, the broken pieces of an accidentally smashed pot should be carefully picked up, reassembled, and then glued together with lacquer inflected with the most expensive gold powder. There should be no attempt to disguise the damage. The point is to render the fault lines beautiful and strong. The precious veins of gold are there to emphasize that breaks have a philosophical merit all of their own.
Many of you may be asking, what is kintsugi? Kintsugi is a traditional Japanese art of repairing something broken by using a kind of golden styled or golden looking lacquer to hide the cracks. It highlights them, turning the damage into part of the object's beauty. The meaning of this is to embrace something's imperfections. It honors the history of the item or the story of the item, and is kind of a Japanese saying I really grew to admire and love, especially when it comes to how proud Japanese people are of their belongings and of things that have a lot of story and a lot of history to tell. I definitely feel that Crimson Desert has that, whether it be via the cracks in the player journey and the individual stories the player would tell of their own random cracks in their journey, such as where things went wrong or some missions didn't work or character just wouldn't talk to you. It kind of adds to the charm, which normally I never say about a game, but there's something about Crimson Desert and the way it's written, the way it's designed, the way it looks, the way it's so large and expansive, the way it's so all-consuming to your psyche, that makes this kind of Japanese saying feel very, very relevant. Though I wouldn't fully agree with the statement, I think it's fair to say Crimson Desert, in many respects, is a flawed game. Its systems are inconsistent, its mechanics are often a touch underdeveloped or undercooked, and its design can occasionally border on incoherent. The first 10 hours or so in particular highlight this unevenness, though I wouldn't say it's as rough as many reviewers say. The game does introduce a vast array of mechanics, many of which feel insufficiently refined or just straight up forgotten for a very long time, and this creates an experience that oscillates between brilliance and frustration, sometimes within the same hour. Combat design exemplifies this inconsistency, though on a minute-to-minute, enemy-to-enemy basis the combat is fantastic and allows for excellent player expression in a variety of skill trees, moves, and combat styles. Boss encounters appear to have been designed for a completely different game altogether. Some mind-bending decisions when it comes to boss movesets and teleportation mechanics, while other moments in boss fights seem to favour controllers over mouse and keyboard or mouse and keyboard over controllers. Camera limitations further exacerbate these issues, especially when paired with highly mobile or teleporting bosses. Quest design is similarly problematic. The lack of clear guidance often leads to confusion, pushing players towards external resources such as wikis or YouTube. While, as I've said previously, this can foster community engagement, it also raises the question about whether this opacity is intentional design or simply poor implementation. There's also a conversation to be had here about the time investment versus returns. At what point for the average player is it too much time investment to get those returns, to feel like the investment has been worth it? I'm normally someone who reviews games from the perspective of time efficiency, and honestly, when I heard about how big Crimson Desert was, I did not think it would meet my bar for solid time investment. That doesn't mean I always like short games. Red Dead Redemption 2 and Breath of the Wild still remain to this day some of my favourite games of all time, as does Cyberpunk 2077. So if the dialogue is rich and the execution on point, I can definitely be sold into investing a lot of time into a game. But Crimson Desert definitely pushes the boundaries of that many, many times, and I would be very interested to see the stats on how many players gave up after 10, 20 or 50 hours. However, at this point I think it's important to distinguish between flaws that contribute to the game's identity and those that actively undermine it. Certain elements fall firmly into the latter category. The main plot, for instance, is not just unconventional, it's pretty poorly constructed, lacking cohesion, and it feels like the cohesion they inserted here was kind of made up at the last minute or just copy and pasted in from somewhere else. Stakes and narrative clarity don't always translate very well for the player, though the boss design is just awful. Purely awful, with some encounters completely blowing your mind in terms of how they even pass the testing phase. I've heard one argument be that Cliff himself is not a great character. I don't know about that. I quite liked him. Okay, he's a bit of a yes man, and those grunts needed to be, well, toned down a little bit. At some points it felt like a NPC could tell you some heartbreaking story and Cliff would just go, oh, like, oh, damn, that dialogue was really good, but that response was terrible, and that happened a few times. And they definitely don't enrich the experience or contribute to its charm. Unlike what I've talked about before, they definitely take away from the charm and pull you out of the immersion. And in a game that has so much immersion and is really built on being lost in the world, those kind of moments where you're pulled out, they do stick out a lot more. And we have to also talk about the debate, really, about the good and bad of post-game patches. Now, normally post-game patches take longer than they did in Crimson Desert, and that's why I'm giving them a pass. I think it was within 12 days they'd fixed the majority of the issues players had with the game, and that obviously is showing their MMO background and how quick they can push out these patches. And I have to respect them for that. Yes, the game had issues to start with, but by God, they were fixed very quickly. And yet, somehow, none of those flaws I mentioned truly diminish the experience, and in many ways, they define it. Kintsugi. The imperfections here are not hidden, they're there for all to see, but they do become integral to the overall form of the game. The overall impression the game leaves on you, those cracks, they form part of it. Its systems may be rough, but they're also ambitious, experimental, and expressive. The game's build crafting systems, for example, allow for significant player creativity in builds, and there's no kind of guide rails on them. It's very much like there's no PvP, we'll just let the player have fun. Excellent. In a minute-to-minute fight, you can change your style of fighting and have a blast doing it. You can go from WWE wrestling moves to flying through the air and jumping down on people's heads, crows chasing your enemy mid-air, to straight-up punch-ups and drop kicks and sweeps, into arrows and raining down death from above or slow-motion shots to the head. And this not only results in a highly personalized combat system, it also results in highly personalized moment-to-moment, minute-to-minute player choice when it comes to killing enemies, and that is absolutely awesome. And yes, I saw a lot of hate about the puzzles and how they defy logic, and I think part of this game as well is understanding the developer's mindset and style of puzzle making. I did find some of the plugging the kind of connectors in to get electricity going a bit annoying because they just seemed like hidden in, like a needle in a haystack style design, which I really didn't like. But generally speaking, the more you play, the more used to you get of this. I still don't forgive the whole helmet memory idea and all that crap. Wasn't for me. But generally speaking, I think part of the whole journey here is figuring out how Pearl Abyss want to do puzzles, and because there's so many different ideas, it does take a while to kind of piece them all together and then start being able to recognize them in the game. So yeah, in the end, Crimson Desert may be broken in places, but it never feels unplayable. It always feels ambitious. It always feels like the developers took risks, but for the most part, they managed to pull off those risks and implement their ideas to a point where it was fun. I do think games like Crimson Desert will age exceptionally well. As players and critics move beyond expectations shaped by more conventional open world titles, Crimson Desert's uniqueness will become more apparent and more appreciated. Its flaws become part of the texture of the game rather than a bit of friction.
Breaks have a philosophical merit all of their own.
It does take a special type of game to make me feel that way. I'm a bit of a harsh critic when it comes to these things, but somehow, someway, Crimson Desert manages to piece all these things together and make it an experience and a world that you will not forget for a very long time. Thank you very much for listening. If you got to the end, thanks so much. Take care, like and subscribe, helps me out a ton. And yeah, I'll put the full review up in a few days with all 3 parts put together in one. Peace, take care.